We need the audio. Good morning, dear audience. We find you here from Sabina, from the terrace of part of the farm, the small house it's called locally, Casetta, because the bar Wi-Fi reception, including my acid house tracks, are not working this morning because I think the weather. And so we have just regrouped here, but it's an interesting view because behind me I have a couple of 500-year-old cypresses that were evidently already depicted in the early 17th century by a very well-known painter. And we are in a very grounded, storied area. I take that term from a certain colleague, Bernard Ansencili, a story in place, a garden that has been extant for about 2,000 years. There are vestiges of its ancient Roman past in the planting, in the type of foliage that you find around the garden. There are trees that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And in short, to work here and perform any kind of cultural act is to do so in a very long historic continuum. For that reason, I never really refer to myself as a proprietor of such a thing, but rather a kind of temporary steward, and mostly chapeau on that level to my partner, companion, and husband, Giuseppe Catalano di Melilli, who comes from a very old agrarian tradition and has taught me a kind of hands-on approach to nature, which I was really always most comfortable reading about. Today's Zoom is spurred on by the thankful presence of this object, which is a multiple in an edition of 500 by the great British, great international artist, Jeremy Deller. It is a paper foil that has been glued onto a stainless steel 500 milliliter can that has been produced as a result of many, many hands. Usually when you see artworks on the wall in a museum, the making of the artwork is not related. That's one of the drawbacks, I think, of contemporary art, that the process behind the making of it, the often seamless industrial or conceptual touch, doesn't cohere with the revelation of who actually produced it. One of the wonderful things about working with Jeremy Deller has been his constant acknowledgement of the many people involved in the process, particularly a great thank you to his longtime associates, Fraser Muggeridge, who have one of the most important graphic design studios in the world. And they are based in London. Jeremy Deller has worked with them for many years. You all may know the artist through his Turner Prize nomination or through some of his most extraordinary artworks, which surpass any idea of what a contemporary piece can be, whether it's his early and pioneering use of parades, whether it's his involvement of music and people from all cultural backgrounds in his works, which are not meant to be populist and yet are deeply democratic. Jeremy Deller does not pander to any particular party or bank of beliefs other than a deep sense of equity and equality among all people. I'm fascinated by this artist because of my deep interest, obviously, in art and the idea of embedding an artistic practice in a political practice and vice versa, embedding politics in an artistic practice. How do you do that in the 21st age with NFTs and even this forum being largely virtual, no matter how old the trees are behind us? How do you make a bridge between practices that are of manual labor still going on in the field, where workers, particularly those in agriculture, are often even exploited or not protected, and yet the final product still does not make a price that can guarantee a way of life continuing. Small farms are at risk the world over, and they are the frontier against the abolition of diversity. I mean, basically, they are they are the frontier, against, in favor of biodiversity, because it is through small farms that have traditional forms of planting, traditional forms of seeding, traditional forms of land and ground maintenance that are preserving ecosystems worldwide. And yet there's very little interest actually in the life of farmers. There's a great snobism towards farming as a profession, even though that's slowly changing. And there's really no valorization of the land as a way of life, as it still may have been the case in the 19th century. If you think of some of the great paintings, such as The Gleaners by Millet, or some of the great paintings of landscape of Courbet, or earlier, someone like Poussin, or the many, many great painters who have thematized landscape as the pinnacle in some ways, I think even more important than history painting, of the rivalry between art and nature. Here we are looking at a small basket woven by a woman named Patrizia. I can gladly send any info and details to anyone interested, who has gathered these reeds herself, and the light ones are, I think, a straw, and the darker ones are young olive branches. This has practically no value economically, and yet it is of inestimable value culturally. One of the earliest artifacts, material artifacts that shows artistry in the world, is a basket that was found in, I think, in the Middle East decades ago, but it's 10,000 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm basically creating a scenario to valorize this kind of object. How does one valorize the making of things and the knowledge that lies in the hand in a post-conceptual and NFT virtual Bitcoin kind of moment? In my opinion, it's working directly with artists who, for me, have that extra dimension that enables them to make bridges between disparate fields and use an area of the brain that I always call the sort of the illogical one, that is really the one that interests me most. When students, when just anyone extemporaneously riffs on something, you can think of this in jazz as well. Free jazz, for example, it's in that moment of creativity and on the spot inventing that I think real jumps and leaps paradigmatically are born. So what does this object mean in a way? It means that an artist in UK, whom I've met really only twice, has bet on a collaboration, just as I have, that has taken place in relatively few emails, and with just a profound understanding of what the role of art is in society and what the role of art can be in other structures. Jeremy Deller has obviously joined a core group of artists who are of similar ilk and subscribe to a same sort of politics in a post-conceptual artistic way. I think of Jonathan Monk, Liam Gillick, Ryan Gander, the many artists that we've had, David Shrigley, the many artists we've had the privilege to work with, who are cognizant of using even graphics or politics as ready-mades, as a kind of progression upon what an artist like Marcel Duchamp theorized, that by putting two disparate objects together, you could make meanings without necessarily having to make either object. So Deller has not even hand touched this object, and yet it is a sculpture by him. This is the fruit of many decades of artists that are prior to him. And what makes a good artwork is not necessarily only the moral or political intention, but its coherence above all in a stream of artists' works. And the artists who are working in this small group of stable that we have are all keenly aware of each other. So that, for example, when I asked Brian Donnelly, AKA Cause, to make an edition of Olive Oil, he in some ways was riffing off the prior editions, even if subconsciously, and it was a dialogue that is being created. The same goes for Deller's use of font here, his use of his prior works. All of these are many layered meanings and interpretations which one can go into when one looks at what this piece is. I love the fact that he is excavating part of the can. That is the same practice that was used by one of the predecessors, art historically in the series, the artist Joseph Kossuth, who wanted actual can left free to show the sculptural quality of the original object itself. And if you look at the edition by Heimo Zobernig, which is a blank can entirely, it is the ultimate tribute to the beauty of the utilitarian proletarian product of this very simple, unornate artist, agricultural object, so to speak. It's the same kind of love of an object that Duchamp felt when he nominated a shovel as a sculpture and called it In Advance of the Broken Arm with a lyrical poetic title. So in short, I choose artists based on their artistic prowess as opposed to filling any other niches. But I find that when one chooses sheer excellence artistically, that all the other pigeonholes are well covered as well. Jeremy Deller is an artist who has moved people who don't even know about art. At his pavilion in the British pavilion in the Venice Biennale a number of years ago, I remember seeing people leaving there, their face wet with tears. And that was his incredible ability to create synesthesia as well, his ability to use music and fuse music and sound. His deep knowledge of music is something that has always struck a chord in me. I myself come from a family that has artistic and musical strains in it. And on some level, many of the artists that I am interested in all have similar interests in music. And some of them make that more overt, say Liam Gillick, who did an extraordinary light show a couple of years ago for, I believe it was New Order. And other groups have, and other artists have worked with musical groups extensively. You think of the many, many artists who work with music. This olive oil is, of course, a gesture to Giuseppe Catalano, the grower, and to the farm and to the context, which is a very rooted local context where growing olives is not exactly the easiest profession on earth. But the other side is a tribute to a musical genre, which is a kind of underground genre, which is a predominantly youth culture phenomenon from the 1980s. I'm not an expert in it, but Deller is referencing his own audience and his own previous work in a way that I allow freedom for. And it's this kind of generosity, I think, that you can see, this double-faced generosity where we allow each other to motivate platforms that we may not have ideated ourselves. That is part of the wonderful exchange when a great work of art, which I deem this to be, is made. I would close here unless anyone has any questions for me. I don't know if the chat is enabled, but to end basically on the idea of what an embedded practice in art is today and how one can work, post, say, the elevation of life to a shelf, which artists in the 60s did. We think of something like the famous show of Johnny Cunelis, where he filled a gallery latico with horses or put a live parrot on a shelf. The conundrum of creating a living moment inside art is something that many, many artists have thought about. And in some ways, the Italians have really done a very good job encapsulating that. I think of someone like Emilio Proni, who worked again and again on the theorem of making that moment of life itself the artwork, and his condensation of that moment into a microsecond, millisecond, or so forth, and his ability to map it with very simple graphic schemes, or just showing a leaf or showing a pine cone or a sunflower or all of the elements that could have the Fibonacci cycle in it. Those were all ways that he showed life. Speaking of life, to my great joy, we have some some music happening here in the background, thanks to an extraordinary team, which I am going to, against their wishes. We have Jennifer Lawless from John Cabot University. We have Karolina Lusikova, specially in from Kazan, Tatarstan, and Luca Vitiello, who is with a very wonderful band called Rainbow Island and an expert himself in electronic music. I could not have put this event together, let alone even this Zoom, without the help of the many hands. I'd also like to thank the Avar family, who helped Giuseppe Catalano pick the olives, take them to the mill, fill them into the cans, and the people at Copione, the people at mailboxes, all the many, many people, my daughter Noema Kasuth, who helps us with the logo, and with the many, many people who have gone into creating an object like this. It's my deep and heartfelt thanks. Most of all, of course, the artist for getting into bed with us all. And a huge thanks to everyone. Now, if I may, that soundtrack is good. Keep it coming. If I may call our county squire to the forum here. Giuseppe Catalano di Melilli comes from an ancient land holding family on some level, thanks to feudalism and the idea of sharing the profits of the land in a 50-50 way, or else working on it. Another scheme since about 1200 is running through his blood, so to speak. His grandfather is, or his adoptive grandfather and great uncle is the great realist writer Giovanni Verga, who was one of the first to capture the essence of what agricultural life was, just as Paolo Frontini, the great musicologist, captured peasant songs in Sicily, putting down on paper for the first time music, the type of music that had never been recorded before, certainly not south of the Alps. Let me introduce Giuseppe Catalano, who's going to tell us a little bit about what growing an olive is like and how long it takes and under what conditions. Thank you. And thank you again, Jeremy, Fraser Muggeridge, and all concerned.
Hello, we are just trying to a few words of what agriculture is here at the moment in Sabina. I'm Sicilian. This for us was just a sort of immediate love with this place that we just discovered by chance. And it's a very old placement where this is based on a Roman villa, and it goes out through the Middle Ages, and it's now sort of all the trees that you see in the back are really 100-year old. And also some of the olives here are 100-year old. They were planted by the monks of the monastery of Farma, who was endowed by the father of Charlemagne. And so the things go back to the 7th century. And some of the trees here are like 400, 500 old. But, and from this plot here, from this parcel, we make our best selection, because the ground also is very special, like with sort of pebbles and clay that make a very particular flavor to this oil. And we cannot house them every year because due to the conditions, of course, of the climate change as well. But of course, we have other the same variety that are around the property. Property is around like 40 hectares, about 26 of pasturage with olive, and a few hectares of specialized olive orchards. And the thing is actually that we as a farmers in Italy, we normally have like 60% of the time just moving papers around. I mean, especially we have the organic thing to comply, all the kind of instruction, all the passages of the oil from the olive to the table are really really painstaking away, and we just start, of course, from working the land, where we were normally being helped by sheep that we had on the ground, but we couldn't find any more shepherds to do that, and so we have only occasionally animals on the ground that, of course, help us to fertilize the ground, but of course we do all the rest with our organic manure and what we call that, supplements. And after that, of course, we have to take care of the trees. Trees means pruning. Pruning is has to be done all the year round. Of course, more in spring, but all the year round has to be taken from the sprouts that come from the ground, that come from the trunk. I mean, it's sort of day by day taking care of that. And after also there's also major pruning when we reshape the trees again in a new shape that is more modern and actually enables also the workers not to climb on stairs, to do that always based on the ground, and also have the olives more near to the lower levels. They're more fruited, like just imagine like 3 Christmas trees, like all set on a tree, like as a shape. And of course, for doing this, that the trees that are not being originally shaped like that, it takes long years, of course, to take them to this more modern thing. We just made some more of them this year, and they will probably be into production in like 2 or 3 years before we can get something out of it. But we have, of course, other parcels where we are actually harvesting, and you harvest. We harvest by hand most of it, also with other mechanical means that actually always handheld, and after that we have, of course, to take them to the mill, take it back the oil to the warehouse, make the blendings, taking them back to the mill to have them bottled, and of course, and now part of that we go on our let's say house brand commercial line, and some of them, of course, the best batches are reserved for the artist editions, and these are actually normally we have to also label them, and some of them are not very easy to do that, but of course we are growing skills year by year, and of course also to get the result as the one of Jeremy Deller. It has some technical particularities that actually are actually giving us a great pleasure when we see the final product, but I can tell you it's not really easy. I mean, and so it's quite a complex, and of course I could go in detail, maybe more in detail, but it will be not progress more. I think you just know it's a quite complicated and sort of and needs a very attentive care. And we do that with great effort, but also with great pleasure when we see the result. And of course, we have to thank also Jeremy Deller to assist us in this kind of course, helping us to saving an agricultural practice that actually will be sort of probably out of the market in a way if we don't have, of course, enrich it with some other content that is the case as it's now. And so this actually I think is also one of the best results that we could have from our activity. I think, Cornelia, that is it. And well, you'd make some conclusions or something about that.
So we can just say right here for the conclusion. We'd like to thank everyone for having joined us. Anyone who has not been in the European time and who's made the effort to get up at the crack of dawn somewhere or join us from any other continent. Thank you so much. Just wanted to thank the many artists with whom I've worked over decades, also in the field of agriculture. In the background, you see a travertine bench by the great Canadian well, now he lives in Philadelphia, artist Ken Lum, who is an artist I've worked with for many decades. I think you can see it in the back. It's just a simple travertine bench.
Put it in the center. It's down there. This one here.
Yeah, I feel fortunate to have lived for almost 2 decades in my prior lives in San Casciano di Bagni. And here's a book that I did with a cover by Ken Lum in a space that I ran there, where we exhibited the work of farmers such as Francesco Bologna, who was a wonderful dear friend who gave his all to agriculture. We did exhibitions of botanical exhibitions, wild grasses, with Beth Miller from Santa Fe. We've done wild roses. I worked milking stools with Pierre Keller from the ECA in Switzerland. I did many projects on a grassroots level with agriculture. And it's a great honor to have this great soul and mind and carrier of a tradition which does not get the kind of dedication artistically that it might have in prior centuries, and certainly deserves economic and cultural attention at the highest levels. And I'm very grateful to the many artists who understand the deep link between art and agriculture and are willing to work in that interspace. So thank you all for having joined us today. We are very pleased by the reception, and we look forward to continuing. Feel free to reach out to us for any questions or potential collaborations. And should you wish to acquire any of our editions or even marmalades and wine. Giuseppe,
in Europe,
without telling me, has gone into white and red wine and is working with Mario Charmitaro on developing a label specific for that. He and I are absolutely in sync on what we desire to transmit to future generations, and so grateful for the many artists from Emilio Corti, Zobernig, designers such as Matthew Failer, many people who have helped us along the way. They're all listed on our thanks on our website. You can consult that to find out more about us. And a sincere thanks to the music and video and collegial and just general friendship of our partners here today. You feel free to ramp up the volume if you like, Dr. Vitiello. So, till next time. Thank you again.